Okay, so, we're all about digging into the stuff that's really, uh, out there, right? And you've sent us some material on Maine, and some of it's pretty concerning, to say the least.
Yeah, it's definitely eyebrow-raising stuff.
It is, and it really makes you think about, what it means to live in a place where these kinds of things might be happening, particularly when it comes to folks who are already struggling.
Yeah.
So, in this deep dive, we're going to focus on the allegations that there's some serious misconduct going on in Maine. And it seems to be impacting people who are already, dealing with poverty or just lack resources in general.
Right. It's like these systems that are supposed to be there to protect everyone might actually be working against certain groups.
Exactly. So our goal here is to understand what these sources are saying and what it could mean for anyone who's in Maine right now or even thinking about moving there. We've got these excerpts from video transcripts, and they lay out some pretty wild claims. Now, we all know Maine has this image of beautiful nature and, idyllic living, but these sources paint a very different picture. They talk about this troubling reality, and that's what we want to unpack.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast to the postcard version of Maine, for sure.
For sure. So let's dive right in. One of the first things that jumped out at me was this whole thing about financial surveillance. The sources claim that Maine's Fusion Center, which was originally set up for counterterrorism, is now being used to monitor people's finances.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift in focus.
Right. And it gets even more specific. They say that bank accounts with over $5,000 are getting flagged. Just $5,000.
That's not exactly, drug kingpin money.
Exactly. It could be someone's savings,
Hmm.
maybe someone's helping an elderly relative manage their money. It's not a huge amount.
So it makes you wonder what the criteria are here and, what happens when an account is flagged. Are they investigating everyone with a few $1,000s saved up?
Well, the sources don't really get into the legal specifics of it all, but they do suggest that this surveillance is part of a bigger strategy to basically squeeze money out of vulnerable people.
Oh, wow. So they're saying it's not just about monitoring, it's about taking action.
Yeah, they claim that the state uses legal fees, fines, civil actions, and all that stuff to target people who can't really afford to fight back.
Which would make them even more vulnerable.
Exactly. And the sources say that this leads to people being, basically pushed out of Maine because they can't get ahead. They call it a good old boys club. And if you're not in it, well, you're kind of screwed. They even go so far as to say living in Maine is theft of your life.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, it is. It really captures the feeling of being trapped in a system that's rigged against you.
Right, like you're constantly losing ground no matter how hard you try.
Okay, so moving on from this idea of financial surveillance, the sources then zero in on a specific example, Central Maine Power CMP and their billing practices.
CMP. Oh yeah, I've heard some stories about it.
And these aren't just your run-of-the-mill billing errors. We're talking about accusations of intentional fabrication of bills.
Wait, are they saying CMP is making up charges?
That's what the source claims. And they suggest there's a financial incentive for both CMP and the state to do this. Supposedly, CMP gets 100% tax credit on these bogus amounts, and Maine gets 100% tax revenue.
Hold on, so they're both profiting from overcharging customers.
That's the allegation. And they say it's especially harmful to those who can't easily challenge these complicated bills.
So it's hitting the most vulnerable the hardest.
Now, CMP has always blamed their billing system. They say it's just software glitches. But the sources point to investigations like the one by the Portland Press-Herald that supposedly found CMP rushed the implementation of this system and skipped crucial testing.
So it's not just a simple mistake, it's negligence.
Right. And then there's the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC. They launched their own investigation after people's bills doubled and tripled following storms and rate hikes.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. It was a huge mess.
And some people were hit with debts of up to $10,000 because of these disputed charges.
$10,000. That's insane.
The source asks this question. If it was just a software error, why is the error always in their favor?
It's a good point, right?
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder if it's really just a coincidence.
The accusation is that these are fabricated bills designed to overcharge you, plain and simple. And they keep saying that Maine is turning a blind eye because they're making money off it too. The source really urges people to report any billing issues and demand transparency.
So they're saying, don't just accept it, fight back.
Exactly. And they tie it back to that whole despicable Maine theme, and living in Maine is theft of your life. It's like they're saying, this is just another way the system is working against people.
Yeah, it all starts to feel very connected, doesn't it? It does. So this is where things get even more I guess you could say, out there. The sources start talking about what they call rumors of a dark conspiracy involving toxic waste dumping.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is getting serious.
Yeah, they claim that Maine officials were in cahoots with some folks from Massachusetts to illegally dump toxic waste in places like Lemoyne and Hancock. And they say they covered it up by burying it under sand and gravel.
That's terrifying. If that's true, the long-term health consequences could be devastating.
Exactly. And the source goes on to link this dumping to what they call a cancer explosion in those areas. They claim cancer rates have skyrocketed and there are all these new cancer clinics popping up.
Wow, that's a pretty direct connection they're making.
Here's the really disturbing part. They claim that some of the officials who supposedly allowed the dumping are now profiting from this health crisis through these clinics and by selling pharmaceuticals.
So they're profiting from the very problem they allegedly created.
That's the accusation. And they get very specific about the dangers, particularly for people who have drilled wells in those areas. They say there's a real risk of toxic chemicals contaminating the water supply. They call it a silent killer and urge everyone to test your water before you drink it.
It's like a ticking time bomb. You might not even know you're being poisoned.
They even name a specific individual and suggest that they won't be honest if you ask them about this.
So there's this deep mistrust of authority woven into all of this.
Absolutely. And they tie it back to that central theme again, saying living in Maine is theft of your life. It's like they're saying Maine is stealing your health, your finances, your future.
It's a bleak picture for sure.
Okay, so then the sources shift gears again and make this really broad and controversial claim. They say that Maine treats its residents like commodities, especially those with, plastic cards.
Plastic cards, like driver's licenses and stuff.
Yeah, and they actually equate this to slavery. They say the card is like an ownership identification.
Wow, that's some pretty loaded language.
Yeah, it's definitely a provocative way to frame things, but it shows how strongly they feel about this whole issue of control.
Right, like they feel dehumanized by the system.
They then go on to target the size and cost of Maine's government. They call it the largest for-profit business in the state.
And what are they basing that on?
Well, they point to the number of government employees who earn over $50,000 a year plus benefits. They question where all this money is coming from and claim it's being distracted from the slaves, meaning the residents.
So they see the government as this huge financial burden on the people.
Right, and they even do this calculation suggesting that each person has to contribute thousands of dollars just to cover these salaries.
It's like they're trying to show the tangible cost of this big government.
They also criticize the fact that a bunch of new laws were passed in 2024, but the state doesn't seem to be attracting new businesses. They say it's all about tightening control and extracting more from people instead of, helping the economy grow.
So it's like they're being squeezed from all sides.
And then they bring back the Fusion Center, claiming that it's being used to monitor bank accounts and even travel plans. They say it's to prevent people from leaving the state.
That's pretty alarming if true.
They conclude by saying everything the state of Maine does is to keep you trapped there in an endless cycle of paying them.
So it's like a never-ending debt spiral.
Right. And the advice they give is pretty blunt. Get out, sell what you can, and move to a state with a smaller government and a better economy. They even suggest places like the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Wyoming. They mention milder winters, too.
So they're offering an alternative, a way out.
Yeah, they say staying in Maine is like trying to row a sinking ship.
That's a powerful image.
They even share a personal anecdote about leaving Maine years ago and regretting not doing it sooner.
So it's not just theory for them, it's personal experience.
Right. And they end with that same warning, don't let despicable Maine steal any more of your life. Living in Maine is theft of your life. It's a pretty bleak outlook, but it definitely makes you think.
It does. So to sum up, these sources are making some pretty serious accusations. They claim there's financial surveillance that targets everyday people, exploitative billing practices by CMP, that the state is in on a conspiracy involving toxic waste, and a government that's more interested in control and profit than the well-being of its residents.
Yeah, and it seems like the people who are most affected are those who are already struggling financially or who lack the resources to fight back.
It's a reminder that we need to be aware of what's happening in our communities and hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these are just allegations based on the sources you shared with us. We always encourage our listeners to do their own research, look for different perspectives, and critically evaluate all the information before forming an opinion.
Right, these claims are definitely concerning, but it's important to get the full picture. Do some digging, look for evidence, and see if these accusations hold up under scrutiny.
Exactly. And for anyone listening who lives in Maine or is thinking about moving there, These claims should serve as a wake-up call to really investigate what's going on and consider the potential risks.
It makes you think about what it really means to live in a place that supports and protects its citizens,
Yeah.
especially those who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. What does it mean to have a government that truly serves the people and not just itself? It's a question we all need to be asking.
Absolutely. And I think it's a question that's particularly relevant in light of these claims about Maine.
So as you continue to explore this troubling reality, we encourage you to keep asking those tough questions and demand transparency from those in power. After all, it's our lives and our futures that are at stake.
Well said. Couldn't agree more.